Alrighty, so taking it back out of studio mode. Okay. So, like I said, I have opinions about medical gameplay because it is what I do. And a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to do what I do in real life. You know, a lot of people that say they don't want to do what they do in real life and start, in video games and stuff. A lot of them probably don't like their jobs. And I actually, I do enjoy my job. It comes with a lot of challenges and it can be very stressful sometimes. But I really enjoy my job. I enjoy the challenge of it. I find it very mentally stimulating and rewarding. And so that's why I'm excited about medical gameplay in Star Citizen. And we have a little bit of medical gameplay in Star Citizen, but we are at healing tier 0. So there's a lot more coming to medical gameplay and actor status in the future. But what we have right now in game is because that's what was needed. That's what was needed for Squadron 42. Blizzard, we're going to get to the beam, and you're going to understand why I'm anti-medical beam. And I think I made a pretty good case for it. But that's just one thing, one of my suggestions where CIG can going forward, things that they can do to make medical gameplay really interesting, as well as engaging and challenging without being, sweaty try hard. Because that's one thing that a lot of people say is like, oh, okay, well you do this in real life, you want it to be super sim like. No, I don't want that. What I do in real life is very complicated, and I don't want it to be complicated. I want it to be simplistic and fun, but at the same time, I don't want it to be, Battlefield or Call of Duty healing. I want it to be somewhere in the middle, where we can have an expectation of being engaged and allow people who want to go that extra mile with their gameplay to do so. So we're going to start with on this page that I have up right now. And medical gameplay, we're going to have a little bit of a preamble before we go into what they do right and where they can go going forward. But medical gameplay in SC is really broken down into 2 segments. And the first segment is the treatment of symptoms for the actual illness or injury. And I say illness or injury because it's not just going to be injuries that you have to take care of due to medical gameplay in the future. It's going to be... Let's see, leave that. We're also going to have illnesses. That's something that they've talked about. It's something that's in the lore. It makes sense because, people get sick all the time in real life. It isn't just people don't go to the hospital just because they get hurt. But so the things that you use to treat symptoms, and I specify symptoms because all they do is these things, you use them in order to treat the symptoms of the injury or the illness, but it doesn't cure or heal the injury or the illness. And so those symptoms are part of the actor status system. Those sort of different things that impact your ability to play the game, make it more challenging, provide sort of a more immersive debuff style system. And so you have your medical pens, and medical pens are something you can use it on yourself, you can use it on someone else, but they come in multiple different flavors. You also have the multi-tool, which allows you to use the just one drug, which is hemazole, but it lets you do it at a distance for now. But it's an attachment for your multi-tool that lets you provide the drug hemazole. And then you have the Cure Life Medical Tool, which allows you to not only use the basic mode, which just applies hemazole, it also allows you to scan players and figure out more about their injuries. It's a very basic scan. I think it's going to get a little bit more in depth, not too much, but just a little, provide a little bit more context in the future. But it also allows you to administer the other drugs in specific amounts to treat those symptoms. And so that's why this image is important right here. Because you can see that you can go from basic to advanced mode like this, and there's your basic mode. Here's the blood drug level, and the health of whatever it is that you're scanning, and this is how you just administer hemazole only. And then here is the advanced mode, and you can dial in how much each drug you want to administer. And the reason this is cool to me is because these things, showing, how much health you're going to regain on a injured leg, or how much of each drug you're going to give. They show you on a bar, how much you're going to give in an amount based off of, this is how big this dose is going to be. But this is also gives you a timer. And that timer gives you information on how long the patient is going to experience the relief from symptoms given this amount of drug. And then you're also going to, based off of how much you're going to give, it gives you context on, you have to worry about the patient's blood drug level. And this is a real concept. This is something that I love about what CIG does with their development of different aspects of gameplay, in that they do research and they develop something to take it all the way out to sim and then bring it back to fun. And they have figured out, they have done their research and found out that, we can take a concept like pharmacokinetics, which is something that I lecture on to flight paramedics and nurses, and we can take it all the way out to sim and then bring it back to fun by allowing players to use stuff like this to have a lot of player agency and choice, as well as risk and reward involved in their decisions. And it encourages players to understand how the system works in order to get the most benefit out of it. Or you can just do the simple mode. And so what happens with pharmacokinetics is, it's not called the blood drug level, but what you have is the concentration within your blood plasma. A lot of you probably know that your blood is divided into essentially three components. You've got your red blood cells, you have your plasma, and then you have your platelets. And your medications, if you administer a medication, whether it's IV or you take it orally, how much effect you get is based off of how much of it is available in the plasma to act on a receptor site based off of what the drug is. So that's what your blood drug level is. Your blood drug level is a cumulative representation of how much of all of the drugs are available, are essentially in the patient's plasma. And so if you give, you could dial all these up to 11 for somebody that's got, a bunch of injuries, but you're going to overdose them really quick. And so you have to use this device to balance how much you give of each medication in order to get the most bang for your buck for your patient based off of what what's going on. And you don't have to, they've got these destabilizing effects, these debuffs. I want to treat those. I also need to get his health up. But if I give too much of these, it's going to increase his blood drug level over that 50% mark, and he's going to have the overdose symptoms. And I don't want those, because that's going to make it harder for this. Maybe he's part of your squad and he can't stay on mission because he can't really function as well when he's overdosed. But that you want to get his health back up, but I also need to balance that with, I need to get the health up, but I also want to make sure that I am giving them relief from their symptoms, so that way those debuff effects aren't affecting their ability to perform. But that means that, maybe, we're not going to give her surgery because that's the drug that detoxes you. But, you could have a situation where you're going to give a dose of roxafen and demoxifitrine, and they're only going to get like 4 minutes of relief because you had to give a whole bunch of hemazole to provide, to bring up the health of multiple injuries. And that means you're going to have to redose that person in 4 minutes in order to, otherwise those symptoms are going to come back. But the symptoms come back faster than the blood drug level goes down. So you are on the clock and that clock is shorter depending on how severe your injury is. And that's a really cool system to me, because this is basically exactly how things work in real life, only gamified. And that's why when people say, "Oh, you want this, really complex sim," and I'm like, "No, this is perfect. This is beautiful." They just need to take it farther out beyond this is first aid. This is, you are a combat medic, a Navy corpsman or something like that, and this is what you're doing or you're a industry site medic, because that's a thing too. And this is you providing first aid so that way someone can stay on mission and continue to function, or they can make it to extract, or someone can continue to work until you can rendezvous with a medical ship, because you're out on an Orion, or until you guys return back to the station for the day, to unload your hull, and then they can get healing then. That's what this is for, so that way you don't need to get healing. You don't need to get healed. You don't need to be cured quickly. When we can combat these symptoms to allow you to continue to function. But that timer that I talked about, the amount of time that you have to deal with these symptoms, is based off of how severe your injuries are, how much medication you have to give in order to combat the symptoms from those injuries, and then that's going to make your blood drug level rise faster. And so the more injured you are, the less time you're going to have before you're going to have to deal with those symptoms, because your blood drug level won't handle it, and you're going to need to get healing. So that's part of the team effort, where, okay, you're the medic and you're like, he's got a tier 2 or maybe a tier 1 injury, and based off of the, maybe he's got one tier 1 and one tier 3. Based off of those injuries and the symptoms they've got, I can continue to treat this person for 45 minutes before their blood drug level is going to get too high and they are what we call combat ineffective in the military. But the same thing would happen, on a job site, and you're getting first aid. And that's why I think that this is really interesting, because, okay, now you're the medic. You're not only treating the patient, but you're also, going to call for evac, or you're going to, whether depending on what's available, maybe you need to call for evac and they have to get taken back to a station, or maybe, there's because all there's available is maybe a C8R or a Cutlass Red, and they've got a tier 1 injury. Or maybe, you're able to find, based off of, whatever app that ends up being, or you put out for a beacon, you're like, hey, I need a tier 1 bed. Okay, sweet. And Apollo is nearby, and they can be at your be at your position in 10 minutes, 12 minutes. Okay, sweet. That's well within the window of treatment. Either way, regardless of what happens, you can keep them alive, but keeping them alive doesn't keep them in the fight, doesn't keep them productive. For if you're, in a non-combat scenario. So let me go back to my notes. Next we're going to talk briefly about the drugs, and then some potential future drugs that I think that would be beneficial to add to the system that we have already, as well as potential future symptoms that would be relevant to gameplay in regards to illness and other things that can happen. So let's go down to, we already talked about drugs and blood drug level. So this is something that I find really interesting, and a bit of a misconception that I think people have about how it works. There are no nanobots. I'm sorry, Paul, it's not a thing. I've gone through every citation I can find about medical gameplay. I searched all throughout the Starchives for the videos. Nanobots aren't a thing in Star Citizen. You don't use nanobots for healing. Especially with the medical tools and everything. What you have is Hemazol. And Hemazol, we'll read what it says. Hemazol is the primary drug. Here, I'm going to make this big. Hemazol is the primary drug used by medics and can be found in both a med pen, as well as used by both the Cure Life medical gun and the Lifeguard medical attachment for the multi-tool. This drug can stop bleeding and restore health up to the current maximum, in addition to bringing a person back from incapacitation. Bleeding is stopped with any amount of the drug used. So to me, heme is a prefix that means blood. We use that in medical terminology, and that's another thing that I like. Some of these, the naming conventions that they use for these drugs use actual medical terminologies based off of what it is. Some are more accurate than others, but at least they put effort into making them sound, realistic. But so Hemazol, to me, strikes me as a drug that is used to provide a stasis, homeostasis to your blood, and that it's red. And so, in order to restore life to you, restore health, it's basically saying that you have a tier 1 or tier 2 injury to your leg, and you have lost health in that leg. And essentially that means that leg isn't being perfused anymore. It's not getting blood to that leg due to the injury. And so that, to me, that tells me that this is probably contains like synthetic red blood cells, which are what you need to deliver oxygen to the tissues in your body in order for them to be perfusion and have health, essentially be able to function. It also says that it stops bleeding. So to me, that tells me that this is also includes probably synthetic clotting factors, which are found in your plasma, as well as synthetic platelets. I'm imagining that they're not using like donated blood, in the 30th century. They have found a way to synthesize these things. But this is a real thing. When I have somebody that has a significant injury and has lost a lot of blood, yes, I don't just put the blood back in the leg because the leg is hurt, but I do transfusions of blood and blood products in order to stop either stop and or slow bleeding, as well as restore perfusion to allow improved function of the body, restoring health. So that's why I really like the MedPen and Hemazol, because it's not this isn't sci-fi hocus pocus. This is just futuristic medicine based off of what we do already, and it makes sense. Yeah, whole blood, baby. Yeah, typo negative, low titer whole blood. I carry on my Blackhawk. I carry 4 units. On my civilian job, we carry 2 units. But I've also, and sometimes we carry plasma with us as well. A lot of times we'll transfuse platelets too. It just depends. We can even do concentrated factor 7, factor 8, this and that, specific clotting factors. Demexitrin. So this one, the name doesn't really fit with what it is, because like Demex, there's a drug called it's dexamethasone. So it sounds more like a corticosteroid, but it's not. It's a synthetic adrenaline, whereas the corticosteroid is Sterogen, which that name is good. So this one is a little bit less accurate, but I can see why they went that route, because there is something to it. So demexitrin is a form of synthetic adrenaline. So like in my line of work, it would be epinephrine, which you're probably familiar with from like allergic reactions. But you also have, adrenaline is the drug name for adrenaline is epinephrine, but that's essentially what it is in your body. But that can be used to relieve muscle fatigue and symptoms related to being concussed. So that's not what we use adrenaline for as far as treatment in real life. But at the same time, you can use stimulants. A illicit example would be the use of meth, as well as the use of meth and other stimulants by the Nazis in World War II, in order to combat fatigue, as well as make them very, very angry. But it helped you combat fatigue, stay awake, and be more focused for long periods of time, especially if you are being exposed to the rigors of combat. So I think that's kind of why they went with this. Essentially, if you gave someone some epinephrine, they're going to have a lot of energy and they're probably not going to feel fatigued. How focus is going to make you feel, I don't know, but I can see where they went with it. But again, you're using demexitrin to treat symptoms. These symptoms that can be associated with different injuries. We're not going to talk about all the injuries. 24/7 anger and situational awareness, that would freak out a mountain lion. Yeah. I've seen a lot of people on a lot of meth, and they do a lot of really weird things. So Roxafen. Roxafen is a painkiller. So to me, the actual drug is called roxafen, but the pen is opiopen, as in like opioids, which would be like fentanyl, morphine, Dilaudid, things like that we give for pain. And so this one is actually really accurate because, imagine that you have a tier 2 injury. To me, the way they've described tier 2 injuries, like to limbs, it sounds like, okay, you have some soft tissue damage, maybe a little bit of some more superficial tissue bleeding and damage, and a non-displaced fracture. So your bone is fractured in the middle, but it's not like that. It's not separated. It's not comminuted is the term. And so one thing that we do, in the military and in combat medicine is if, you have an injury like that, we're going to, splint your leg or splint your arm in order to prevent the break from getting much worse. But we can give you medication in order to allow you to ignore that pain and continue to move on that splinted limb, with assistance. And this is going to feed into something I'm going to talk about later because it makes sense in the future where, this is one of my suggestions, but it makes sense where we're wearing this futuristic 30th century combat suits, combat armor, even industrial armor. To me, it makes sense that you would be able to take a medication to blunt that pain so that way you're able to bear weight on that leg or use that arm that has a non-displaced fracture. But the suit itself, would constrict, not to the point of like, being a tourniquet, but it would basically form a splint on that arm to prevent further injury. To me, that should be a thing. I think that makes sense. And it would make sense, especially in the context of giving a painkiller in order for you to continue to use that injured limb, to suppress the pain of use, and remove that symptom for a period of time. Sterogen is a corticosteroid that can help relieve symptoms associated with muscle weakness and respiratory damage, such as a chest injury's effects of reduced melee damage or a head injury causing your vision to be blurred. So we don't use corticosteroids to relieve muscle weakness, but if you have inflammation in your muscles, and due to injury, we can give a steroid to remove that inflammation. So it kind of fits. We don't, give it for respiratory damage, but if you are having like an asthma attack or something like that where your lungs are inflamed, we give corticosteroids in order to treat that, to allow you to breathe better. So again, this one, not super, not 100% on point, but it's not far off. So it, and in the future that could be a use for a corticosteroid, but it makes sense, curing, taking care of vision blurring from a head injury, not so much, but it's gamified, so it's totally cool. Resurgera. So this one makes a lot of sense, especially in the context of science fiction. I read a ton of science fiction. I love science fiction. And one thing that's a common theme in science fiction is medications and pills in order to cure a hangover, essentially, or to detox you rapidly. And that's exactly what this is. And I've seen people say, oh, it's basically Narcan. Okay, well, Narcan allows you to reverse it competitively binds with your opioid receptors in order to reverse an opioid overdose. So it basically kicks those off the receptor. Well, that's only one drug. We've got drugs that do similar things for sedative medications and for paralytics. Well, instead of doing that with with individual drugs, they've got a rapid detoxicant, which is much more in line with what you might read in a lot of different science fiction, where it's basically just going to me, the way this works is it would, in lore, the way it would work is it would basically dramatically increase the function and rate of function of your liver, which is what detoxes your blood. Your liver is what will metabolize and help clear medications that are in your blood. It's part of that system, and that's why so much of when you see these sorts of drugs described in science fiction, you're going to get rid of the effects of the drug and get it out of your system. You're going to feel like garbage afterwards, but it'll pass. So it makes sense that we would have this in order to be able to, because if you overdose someone, the overdose is potentially, depending on the setting, worse than the symptoms that they were being treated for. And so you can use this to sort of reset the clock, essentially. But you're going to have to do some work to continue to treat them. But at least this way, they would be, not bobbing and weaving around. So let me get out of full screen mode. Let's see where we're going next with. So the ideas that I had for. Here, let's scroll down just a little bit. There we go. So the ideas that I had for potential future drugs, I just had a few of them. The first is antibiotics. And because I can totally see us getting a infection on a planet because you became injured. And so you don't just have the bleeding associated with the injury, but okay, sweet. I gave Hemazole and I stopped the bleeding and I restored the injury to health, but you still have an open wound and we don't have a med bay to heal you here. Over time you develop an infection. Okay, well, and until we can get you to a med bay and a med bed that can cure that infection based off whatever level it is, I can give you antibiotics out of my medical backpack, just like the other drugs, to stop the symptoms associated with that infection. We're going to talk more about that infection and shock here in a second. But that way you have something, and you can get an infection from all sorts of different things. You could be exposed to other people that are sick. You could get an infection from eating something wrong. So you're like, oh, I'm going to try out these berries or on this planet without scanning them or something. And you get an infection. There's a lot of different ways that you could get infection in the game. We'll leave that up to the game designers. But having antibiotics in order to treat that infection, just like you treat the other symptoms with the other drugs, I think would be a good way to, we've got evac coming, and there's an Apollo with a tier 2 med bay on it that will be here in 20 minutes or be here in 30 minutes, or we're going to finish this mission, finish this contract, and then we're going to head back to the station. We'll get you healed up. But I've got enough antibiotics to stave off this infection for an hour. And so that way you can continue to stay on mission. You can continue to be productive, if you're mining or whatever like that, or doing some exploration until you get back to a med bay and get healed. And it would also prevent that infection from... you could have a tier 3, tier 2, tier 1 infection. And so if you don't have antibiotics, you're after 15, 20 minutes or something like that, your tier 3 infection progresses to your tier 2 and the symptoms worsen, just like with injuries, with wounds. Blizzard says, or you could get an infection because you were taking a nap with your freshly bandaged wounds and someone opened the door of the Valk in a bacteria-heavy atmosphere. Exactly. This is why we need some sort of, whatever the glass stuff is, some sort of plexi to separate the crew area on the Valk from the rest of the ship and the exterior. But I could totally see you're exploring a planet, because there are going to be plenty of planets and areas on planets that are not well explored. And if you are walking around in just civilian attire, no suit, no helmet, and you haven't scanned the atmosphere, You might not, I could see where you scan the atmosphere and you're like, okay, there are harmful microbes on this planet. And so you don't want to take off your suit. Well, if you don't do your due diligence and you don't do the scan before going down, because the other thing is they could break it up based off of the biomes. And so you scan, you scan the planet and you see the different biomes and you click on a biome and then you scan that biome. And okay, this one doesn't have, nasty bugs in it that are going to hurt me. But if we transition into this area over here, because it's a swamp, or whatever, there could be things that are native to that area that are harmful to me. And okay, we're not going to land there. We're not going to explore there because we don't have the equipment, but we will explore over here. Having things like that makes exploration okay, you're doing the exploration. Okay, now you found a resource, and you're going to let okay, there's something to be mined here, or resources to be gathered here, or something like that. Or we found a wreck that's crashed down here, and the crew's dead, but we want to salvage the ship. Okay, well, you're going to want to include that information when you send it back to somebody when you sell that location, unless you really hate them. Because you can say, hey, it's really important that you wear proper equipment, and you have enough air supplies because of the nature of where this is on the planet. And just in case, I would say bring a medic and make sure they bring some antibiotics. The same thing goes for antivenoms or antitoxins, and I call them toxins rather than like an anti-poison, just because antitoxin sounds better. But it does the same thing for as antibiotics. But for envenomations, where you got bit by something that was venomous, or stung by something that was venomous, like whether it's an insect or maybe something pokey on a plant, or poisonings, you touched a leaf on a plant, you should not have done that, or you touched a toxic substance and it poisons you. You inhaled something, or like a toxic gas. Or you ate something, oh, look at these berries. These are really pretty. I bet they taste great. Maybe not. And having, this would incentivize explorers or people who are going down and doing the planet to use scanning devices to scan the things that they find to get information on them before they expose themselves to them. But also to make sure that, hey, we're going to go explore this planet. It doesn't have to be a new planet. It just has to be a planet that hasn't been fully explored. You're checking it out, but you want to plan ahead and have your scanning devices. But if somebody doesn't have the scanning device or accidentally gets stung because they didn't see the thing in the bush, and it gets through their light armor, or maybe they're just wearing a spacesuit. You want to bring these things with you as part of your kit as a medic to say, okay, I can treat this person until we can get back to the Carrack, because we came down here on the Pisces. We didn't land the Carrack just because there's storms and high winds, or because landing the Carrack would use up a lot of our fuel and there isn't a gas giant here to get more fuel from. All these different scenarios where I'm going to come prepared. I'm going to treat the symptom and stave off the going from a tier 3 envenomation to a tier 2 with worsened effects, but we still need to cover this area, or we still need to finish scanning these things, and that way you can continue to stay on mission. I don't know what you would call it. I'm sure there's all sorts of cool names, but we know that there's going to be radiation in game, whether it's solar radiation from the star and Pyro, or you are an engineer on ship. And somehow your reactor gets overloaded and it starts putting off radiation. You're going to want to wear the appropriate equipment to protect yourself. But if you don't have that equipment, or the exposure overwhelms your equipment, or maybe you're on a planet or something like that has radiation, and you didn't do a good scanning, having medications that counteract radiation exposure in order, again, to prevent you from having to deal with those symptoms, but also preventing that illness from radiation exposure from getting worse due to lack of treatment. The other thing is I was thinking that you could use demexatrin for this, or a different. You could add a second type of adrenaline. In the human body, we have two types of. Oh gosh, I'm brain farting on the word. We have epinephrine and we have norepinephrine, two endogenous catecholamines that our bodies produce. And so you could add a second catecholamine, beyond just the demexatrin, or you could just use demexatrin for this. But that way, if you say you don't have your antibiotics, you don't have antivenom or antitoxin, you don't have something to treat your radiation exposure. Well, when you progress from a tier 3 illness of those types, you could go into tier 2, and then you start going to low grade, and then for a tier 1 illness, high grade shock. Okay, well, that brings us to potential future symptoms. And this is something that I thought they could add, where if you're going into shock because you haven't stopped the bleeding, or because your blood pressure is getting so low from one of the things that I just talked about, you could treat that with a demexatrin or the other drug in order to stave off the effects of shock. But maybe have it be like a shorter acting thing. This is just I just need to take care of this long enough, but we know that the clock is ticking on the thing that is causing the shock. But I'm going to help stave off the shock with this. And this is one of those things where, if you are the medic for this squad or this expedition, you can bring these things with you, these medications with you, but based off of your backpack, you might not be able to carry all of them, or you might be able to. Okay, I'm going to bring two vials of each, because I think you should have to reload the your medical gun. And I can bring 2 vials of each. Okay, well, those 2 vials of each might only get you through treating a patient, depending on how severe their injury illness is, for a certain period of time. So part of your planning, along with the scanning that you do, is saying, okay, these are the threats that are known. And so I'm going to bring less of these things that I'm not expecting, or none of them, and more of the things that are more of a risk. This is a process that all expeditionary medics go through, whether you're in the military or you work for a private company, because there's lots of really big companies that do this in real life. This is a part of the planning that goes into these sorts of expeditions and missions. Is, okay, we know that this exists in this area. These things are the threats that I have to worry about. And so this is what I'm going to pack in my kit, because I can't pack, an entire hospital. And the same thing goes for your ship. You'll have limited supplies, and so yeah. So that's the first segment of medical gameplay. And so I talked about what we have in game, but I talked about how how CIG could expand upon that to bring illness into the fore, as well as by doing that, allowing for more symptoms, more medications, and then tying it into other aspects of the game to make the planning of what you're doing that much more impactful. And I think what CIG has done so far with the treatment of symptoms is great. My only gripe is the stupid beam. But other than that, everything they've done has been really, really well researched and really well thought out and planned. And the other thing that's interesting and smart is they're already setting our expectations, because it's easy to get when things are working appropriately. Big caveat: when things are working appropriately, it's very easy to get a low tier injury. It is rare to get a high tier injury. You have to continue to get hurt over and over again. And this is another one of those things that plays into what I think should be a thing is, if you continue to abuse your armor and your suit, and you already have an injury, well, you're going to make it worse. And that's a real life thing. It's a part of the decision making process on whether we evac somebody or not. What's the threat? Is there a risk of further injury? and or is it just a one-off thing and we can just keep going? Yeah, it's a thing. Yeah, Amchuka says fire medics are really good at planning for the best course of action. My brother is a Marine. He tells me the corpsmen are the same way. Yeah, it's people think that it's all about running to the down casualty and throwing a tourniquet on and putting pressure on a wound, and there's so much more to it, and it doesn't have to be complicated. It's just a matter of incorporating other aspects of the game that we already know are going to be part of the game or even in the game already, and just expanding upon them and tying them in together. We in the previous segment, the Spectrum Pulse, your FPS radar and scanning, as well as the scanning that you do from orbit with your ships, all that, ties into your planning. Or, doing research before you even leave, the landing zone or the space station or something like that. Okay, this is what we know, so this is what we're going to plan for. It's good gameplay. So let's scroll down. So the injuries, and they talk about it right here. Injuries are inflicted when a player receives sustained repeated damage. So injuries can be received on any limb, your chest, your head, and they're shown via your HUD or via the scan using the Cure Life medical tool. And so this is the key part. Received when a player receives sustained repeated damage. And so that's why this ties into a lot of people thought that when medical gameplay was coming out and regeneration was becoming a thing, that Death of a Spaceman was going away. No, all this stuff is part of the plan for Death of a Spaceman. And it's part of the futuristic aspects of Star Citizen, where you're not just walking around in pants and a shirt, and you get shot, or you're exposed to something and you don't have much protection. You easily can very easily get injured or severely hurt. No, you're part of your planning is not only the medic has to plan on what to bring based off of the threats to the crew, but also part of that planning is, okay, we need to make sure we're wearing the right protective equipment for the environment, for the threats, and that's why we have, there's not only armor for combat, but there's armor and suits for environments. We have industrial armor because accidents are going to happen when you're mining, when you're salvaging, all these sorts of things. And you need to be, you're not going to get, injured easily. You're not going to get severely injured easily. And it's going to be hard to die. We die a lot right now due to game bugs, but it's dying in the future is not meant to be a thing. If you go back and you read the Death of a Spaceman, it has always been the intent that dying will require something catastrophic happening to you, and usually, more often than not, a result of very poor decisions. I.e., running around in your medical gown in a combat zone. The idea has always been where you would be injured or get an illness and become downed long before you die, and it would take getting downed multiple times with multiple treatments before you get really incapacitated. So it's meant to very much be realistic, because in reality, I was going to pull it up, but I forgot to. If you look at the statistics for the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, the overwhelming majority, like it's not even close, the overwhelming majority of injuries were non-severe, very minor, and treated, on site, or in the field. We had, thousands and tens of thousands of, if not hundreds of thousands of people get injured. But, the overwhelming majority, very high 90%, are very minor injuries. And then a lot of the moderate injuries, were healed in theater and people were returned to service. So that's something we're going to get into. Yeah, PPE checklist. Yep, safety circle. I like it. Yep, safety circle, whatever shape you want to use. So we know what Tier 3, Tier 2, and Tier 1 injuries are. These and the link to this page, which was released with Alpha 3.15, is going to be in the show notes. I'm just using it as a demonstration. But these are what caused the symptoms that you have in game right now, based off of where whether the injury is to your leg, to your arm, to your torso, to your head. And I think that in order to keep it simple and make sense and work with what we have, I think having the illnesses work the same way would be a good idea. Except for if you've got an infection, it starts here and then it goes to your full body, because that's how sepsis works. If you weren't wearing protective equipment, well, your whole body is going to be exposed to radiation poisoning, and it's just going to continue to get worse over time, that sort of thing. But if you got an envenomation, because or a localized toxic exposure to your arm or your leg, it would start there and then could spread to your body. And that's a way they could work that in. But there's multiple tiers of injuries. You need to, in order to heal an injury, to actually cure it, not just suppress the symptom with medication. In order to actually heal it, for a tier 3 injury, you need a tier 3 bed. For a tier 2 injury, or a tier 3 bed or higher, so tier 2 or tier 1. For a tier 2 injury, you need a tier 2 bed or higher. And for a tier 1 injury, you can only heal those with a tier 1 bed. So one thing that's been mentioned, it's mentioned in each one of these blurbs, and it's not something that is really talked about, and I don't really know how it works in medical gameplay. I don't know if it's even a thing right now, is stabilization. And the other thing, it makes sense to me that any med bed could stabilize an injury to prevent it from getting worse over time. We give medications to suppress the symptoms, but you use the med bed to stabilize an injury, to keep an untreated tier 1 injury or tier 2 injury from transitioning to a tier 1 injury. I think that's a good use of the med beds, but I think that needs to have some gameplay associated with it. We'll talk more about that. But right now, healing in the med beds is essentially completely automated. Like, you hop on there and you do a scan and it tells you what injuries you have, and you tell it to heal you, and then you're healed and you're done. Off you go. And it's gonna need to be a lot more than that. They've always said that. Let's see. We're going to get down to that here in a little bit. So that is the 2 segments of medical gameplay in Star Citizen. So how can besides what I talked about earlier with the additional drugs, additional symptoms, things associated with shock, things that are medical in nature versus injury, how else can it improve? Where does CIG's healing, medical gameplay, actor status system go from here? So we already talked about the treatment of symptoms, and how by allowing for additional symptoms, things that are non-injury related, things that are illness related, from especially things that are localized to given areas and can be mitigated and found out about by scanning and using, use the damn Galactopedia, lore equals gameplay. It's, if somebody discovers a poisonous thing on a planet and says it's in this area, that's now canon within the game. That is lore, and that lore is now gameplay. But explorers, they need to have more risk than just falling off a cliff or getting Wookiee slapped by a boreal stalker. And this, like I said, this applies to everybody. If you are, whether you're out in space or you're on a planet or a moon or something like that, there's the potential for injury and illness. You can be EVAing around a derelict while doing salvage, and there could be a solar flare or something, or somebody could screw up while salvaging the wreck or cutting the wreck, and it could cause a release of radiation, that hurts you, or you could do it to yourself, and you're not wearing, the right personal protective equipment. And this is, a thing that, adds a lot of depth to not only the gameplay for medical and healing, but also for the other features that that are being played or performed by players that a medic is supporting. And it gives a lot more risk versus reward and planning for the player, and that makes things a lot more engaging, and it makes it for a much more rewarding experience. You get a lot more sense of accomplishment, especially if you're able to prevent something, or you planned appropriately and the thing happens and you're like, see, I told you, you always listen to the medic. Yeah, Blizzard says, I'm probably going to need a tetanus shot every time I go to the ruined station. Yes, before, while we're en route, everybody, it'll come over the PA system in your character or your galaxy. Now hear this. All crew not, on command stations, please proceed to the med bay for, pre-deployment vaccinations, because that's a thing. Man, did I get so many vaccinations before I went to Iraq and Afghanistan. A whole lot. So many shots. And the other thing that I think can be improved upon is we need additional variation, not just a variation, but additional things implemented. And this is, I think, will play into the HUD. The player interaction system, those reworks that we talked about in the Spectrum Pulse, because we can add a lot, they can very simply add new UI that gives you more information about the symptoms of an injury or an illness, that will, as well as giving more feedback to the patient, because right now the patient just has what they experience, but there isn't anything on their HUD. There isn't anything, telling them that, they've got this long until, the medication wears off. And I think in the 30th century, okay, you're a medic, you're injured, you have these symptoms, or you're ill, and, for whatever reason, and your medic scans you and says, okay, you've got this, and this going on. I'm going to give you this much of these 2 or 3 medications, I'm going to need to redose you in 15, 20, 30 minutes or whatever, as those things wear off. Well, I think that the patient should have more information about their symptoms. And I think that this could be beneficial so that way they know ahead of time, like, okay, the medic just gave me some medicine. I can go off and do what I'm doing. And a reminder that, okay, I should start heading back because the timer's counting down, and I know it's going to take me, 5 minutes, 10 minutes to get back out of this cave, in order to get back to where the medic is. And I don't want to be limping, during that time and have it take even longer and have my injury progress from a tier 3 to a tier 2. To allow the patient to feel more engaged and part of the treatment process, because that's a thing in real life too, patient education. And I also think that it's something that could be incorporated into the med bed for stabilization of an injury, in order to make it so that way, if you can't heal an injury, you can stabilize the injury and give the patient feedback while they're being healed, while they're being stabilized, in order to be a part of the process and not just, be looking up at everything. The other thing is with stabilization, I think that, stabilization can also play into the treatment of symptoms. I think that's part of the plan, but I don't think it's incorporated yet, because what happens in real life is if I drop some medication in a syringe and I just give it IV push like that, generally it doesn't last as long, but I'm able to give it quickly, which makes it really good for field work. If you're a combat medic or you're a paramedic on the streets. But if I give you someone an infusion, if I give you, you hop in the med bed, you say, okay, you're injured nearby. We got you in the med bed pretty quickly. Instead of treating you with the med gun, we're going to use the med bed to stabilize you. And I I can't I can't heal this tier 2 injury with my tier 3 bed, but what I can do is I can give you an infusion over 1 to 2 minutes of the same drugs that I was going to give you a injection of, and that will allow for a much longer therapeutic window. Instead of it lasting 5-10 minutes, maybe it'll last you 15-20 minutes before you have to be redosed, while also making it so, okay, I'm going to give you I'm going to treat you, and this treatment's going to last longer and be, allow you to be more productive, allow you to stay in the fight longer. It's just going to take maybe 1-2 minutes longer to do it because it's an infusion. But also, doing that allows you to get that added benefit without going over the blood drug level, without overdosing. And so somebody can stay in the fight longer. And so that gives a lot more value to things like the C8R or the Cuddy Red, because they can't heal higher injuries. But if they can stabilize your injury that you already have and prevent it from getting worse, while also providing a what we call a longer mechanism of action for treating your symptoms, that adds a lot more value in order to keep players playing before they eventually have to return, and find a high enough tier med bed to get healed. And so I think that would add a lot to the gameplay and add a lot more value to those ships that people don't see a lot of value in already. So now we're going to talk about the elephant in the room. Get rid of the stupid beam. Before we talk about that, let's see, is it this one?
As a follow.
Yeah. So we're going to listen to them talk about why it's a beam real quick.
From the chat, there's a lot of the things that are done in the first person, like medical stuff like that, are beams. It's switch an attachment, switch an item, shoot a beam at a thing. Shoot a beam, it heals a thing. Shoot a beam, it salvages a thing. Shoot a beam, it repairs a thing. Why is that? Let's talk a little bit about why in a game of this size and scope are these things, beams, and like, why aren't we making like Operation? is you get what I'm saying? Get where I'm going with this? It's like, why beams, basically?
Well, kind of for a start, a lot of the systems that we have in game at the moment are the very, very first implementation of them. So,
very, very first implementation. So, they remember how we talked about how before they reprioritized those teams to Squadron 42, we would get features that were incomplete. And there were, a lot of things were getting built out in order to get incorporated into Squadron 42 after being, built for the PU. But they also had timelines that they were beholden to. And so we've got animations for you using the med pens and injecting someone else, injecting yourself. If you use either of the med guns on yourself, it puts it against your arm, and essentially, you're almost injecting yourself. So pretty much the only time is when you're healing someone else with a gun that they use a beam. To me, this is the very first implementation, and so in order to be able to test the under the hood aspects of the gameplay, making sure that this tool actually does this thing for the actor status, they needed to get in a simplified version of it in order to test it, in order for us to use it and get feedback for them, as well as to get some of that into Squadron 42 to continue to iterate on that. And so I think that a tractor beam absolutely makes sense. That is quintessential sci-fi. I think a salvage beam makes sense because you are using a laser to degrade the structural integrity of something and then using a tractor beam to suck it up. A mining beam, the same thing. You are degrading the what would you call it? Whatever holds rocks together. The rock's cohesion. You're degrading the rock's cohesion by shooting it with a laser. Okay, that's totally believable in sci-fi. And then it breaks up and you suck it up with a tractor beam. Totally makes sense. The beam in Star Citizen makes 0 sense. And I'll tell you why. There is nothing in the lore that says that we use beams to magically move medicine from inside this device through the air, then through armor, which is meant to stop bullets and lasers, and then through a spacesuit, which is meant to stop the environment of space and keep you inside and the space outside, and then through your skin, which has been gone through thousands of years of evolution to keep things from going through it and getting into your body. It makes 0 sense, even in the 30th century. And so that's why I hate beams, because it's also not a sci-fi trope. I've never in my life, in a book or a game or a movie or something like that, heard of someone using healing beams. Now, there are lasers for performing surgery. We've got Bacta tanks. All sorts of stuff. Even nanobots that are injected, not beamed across space. So it's oh god, medical salvaging tool that we can set to reverse. So the term is harvesting, and I wouldn't be surprised if it becomes a thing, because that's an actual job, and it's actually a job that a lot of medics and EMTs get into after they want to get out of working in the field because it's rough. Going into organ and tissue harvesting pays a boatload of money, but you have to be on call a lot. That's why I didn't never get into it. Anyway, medical salvaging, it's a thing. I wouldn't be surprised if it became a thing in game. I would like it to be the illicit side of medical gameplay. I'm okay with this. I don't know if there's anything R-rated about that would prevent them from putting it in the game, but I think it would be cool, because waste not, want not. There's a freshly dead body, or something like that. Don't want those organs going to waste. Just saying. Waste not, want not. So the beam doesn't make sense. The other thing that the beam really... let's finish listening to his quote, because I get where Jared is coming from in what he's going to say, and I totally understand that, and it makes sense because I don't like it in other games, but I don't think we need the beam to address that. I'm going to talk about why.
When you think about it, it was very convenient for us to put that on something like the multi-tool, which is a very good base for swapping in and out attachments, changing the functionality of it, and kind of getting the very first level of each of these mechanics in there. So when I talk about salvage, for example, the multi-tool, the iteration that we're putting in now, which is the very simplest form of salvage, is always what the multi-tool is going to do. It's not going to do anything more than that, but everything extrapolated out from that will be more. Like, for example, being able to take weapons off ships, for example, cutting bits off and putting them in your reclaimer, going selling ship parts and stuff like that. That will all come down the line. So I think there's obviously, if people are saying that everything feels a bit beamy at the moment, it's because it's a lot simpler. It's a much simpler interaction than what it's going to be down the line, when there's going to be a lot more considerations to kind of like take into account. And if you think about even like the medical gun versus the multi-tool, it feels like if you have the medical attachment for the multi-tool, it's very easy to run up to someone and go like, hey, I'm going to heal you, I'm interacting with you, I'm firing the beam at you, cool. That's basically what we wanted it to be. It's a very simple way of keeping someone alive, which is what we wanted it to be in the universe. It's like an emergency tool that you're using to stabilize someone. But when you look at the medical gun, you don't just run up to them and fire the beam, or you can do if you want to, because the functionality is on there, but an advanced user or a medical practitioner will be going over to the advanced side, moving all the sliders around, checking all the symptoms, all the issues that they've got with them, and making some informed decisions based off that. Now, in terms of like why beams, obviously if we wanted to make this a bit more visceral and up close, we're going to end up taking a lot of control away from the player. So if it was, say, for example, Jared, you were down on the floor and you were wiggling around on the floor, and I was trying to get hold of you, we would both have to be locked into place for that entire process, which both might make both of us like vulnerable. For example, taking control away from the player is obviously sometimes appropriate, but doing it all the time for a lot of these different mechanics makes things a lot more difficult. So obviously it's a bit nicer to keep player control in, keep people at range, and just kind of have like almost beam or range devices that let us do some of these kind of perform some of these systems.
the control thing is where I was hoping you were going to go with that. It's in a multiplayer game, losing control of your character is probably one of the least favorite things that can happen. But in a massively multiplayer game where when people can start prompts with you, it's like, oh look, I'm going to try to heal you, or I'm going to try, and it just stops you, and it's you know, in order for the animations to match up, like, you know, this person's going to grab you and they're going to, you know, rip open your thing or whatever, and now your character is just stuck while somebody else is essentially playing and in control of your person, is a very uncomfortable and not very enjoyable experience. So the beams allow that kind of flexibility.
Okay, so nope, we're not ready for this. Get that here in just a second. Let's see. So I totally get what Jared was saying about locking in your character with these animations, because like I tried to find a good one, but we're going to look at a couple clips really quick. There's a lot of games where, you know, especially if you're wounded and you're healing, you're playing as the medic, you know, and you're doing a thing and it's an animation, you know, and you're usually only doing it for, you know, the CIG wants this level of immersion, and you're a lot of times these animations, you know, either the person doing the animation is disconnected from the other person, like in Squad, or like you know, in battle, you know, but the person has to stay there. They can't move, you know, can't move out, otherwise it resets it, or it can lock the person in. And I think the way that we solve this is, instead of, you know, you are giving if you're using the beam, it's because you're giving a rapid dose of something. You're not giving an infusion. And you don't need the animation to be long. You just need to get up next to the person and then quickly administer it. You go, just like you do on your own arm. It's not even a second long. I think it's wholly unnecessary to be able to beam people from range. You know, and it doesn't add anything to the game. It takes away a lot from that combat medic gameplay that, you know, makes the experience rewarding and interesting and fun. You don't need to do the whole bandaging for 4 seconds or something like that. Or, you know, I'm going to come up next to you and, you know, do whatever. It doesn't need to lock you in for a long period of time. I totally get that. And it can be jarring, but at the same time, I think it's more important for, okay, you are injured, you are requesting healing, you know, or treatment. Hold still for an effing second. You know, you shouldn't be doing something while you are getting treated. That is like the absolute basics tenet of being a combat medic. And we're going to talk about that here in a second. So, yeah, let's look at these. Yeah, it significantly reduces the risk reward opportunity and tactical decision making available for the medic and the team in the hostile environment. You know, treating from a distance, you know, it reduces the need for utilizing cover, for moving the patient to cover, for calling for coordinating fire, you know, or other means of suppression while you extract the victim. You know, like I said, these are the basic tenets of being a combat medic, and it's what makes being, you know, combat medic gameplay so exciting. It's why people like playing it. And, you know, if, you know, I totally get it if you're doing 20th century bandaging, you know, 20th century putting on a tourniquet, but we are giving medicine, and you should be able to just, you know, like if you watch somebody get a hypo spray in Star Trek, it takes that long. You're not in the animation while you're dialing in the dose. You know, you can scan them while they're moving around doing their thing. You don't have to stop them to scan them, but you scan them. You're like, okay, I'm going to dial in this dose, and they hold still for a split second, and then you do the animation, and it automatically you just grab their arm, and you're done. That's it. You know, it's not intrusive. That's, you know, not a bad thing, but it makes it so that way, you know, okay, I know I have to be next to this patient to heal them. If it's in a combat environment, you know, I need to weigh that decision of, okay, in order to give them a dose of hemazole, in order to treat these symptoms, you know, if we need to get them to cover, we need to establish covering fire. Maybe I need to deploy a shield or throw smoke. You know, do I, you know, run to them and then drag them back to cover if they're not in cover? And there's other ways that we can incorporate this by further expanding on it. But yeah, I love being the medic in Squad. I love being the medic in Arma. I think Arma is too over the top. I think Squad is the right level of simplicity. But we don't need these long multi-second animations that drive everybody nuts in Battlefield or Call of Duty for rezzing someone. We don't need any of that. We just need a quick animation to give a dose of a medicine. And if I can give, in real life, if I can give a syringe of something in less than a minute in a game, we can give it in, a split second where, it's, you've dialed in the dose and it's, the med gun thing, pressurizes it into a port that's standardized on every armor and every spacesuit. And that's why I think that they're going with what they had from an initial implementation, because they want to do something more interesting and diegetic later on, but they just didn't have the time right now, kind of like with so many features of Star Citizen. And I think there's a lot of room for improvement that is not complicated and is not negatively impactful. So let's look at a couple of examples real quick that I found on the internet. And this is in Squad. And we're only going to watch this for a few seconds before we go to the next one.
Was shooting us.
Thank you.
Damn, there's one here, I think. Yeah, one guy up here. Thank you.
There's one more left on the ticker where I died. They're like in the road. Just my...
Dead here. Copy.
But they're giving up, which is good news.
Thank you.
So I picked this clip because it does a really good job of showcasing if you are able to heal at range, it takes away a lot of the risk and tactical decision making that a medic would have to, would normally have to do. It makes the medic gameplay far less engaging because that first guy, yes, SC will have hospital gameplay, but that's for we're not really going to get into that too much. We're really talking more about like we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a little bit. But for right now, so that first guy that was behind the truck, okay, he started taking fire. He ran for cover, and then he had to bound from the cover that he was in to get close to the victim, to the patient, in order to treat him. And it wasn't, okay, I'll just stay back here behind cover from 15 feet away or whatever, and I'll heal him from here. That's not engaging gameplay. That's a significant reduction in the risk to the medic. It's significant reduction in the emergent gameplay and the decision making. It's just not as rewarding. You can think about a scenario where, okay, there's our wounded out there, and I can't get to him because we're taking fire. But okay, sweet, we're going to establish fire support and throw out a smoke grenade. And Star Citizen, you could, deploy a shield or something like that. I think would be good because we're going to have those, or throw a smoke, run out there, drag him back to cover, all that sort of stuff. That is quintessential combat meta gameplay, and healing at range really neuters a lot of that. I know it's not long range, but it's long enough where it really fucks it up for me. And I know it messes it up for a lot of people. It makes it super gamey and more World of Warcraft and less Space Sim. So let's watch this one. This is Arma. And I apologize for the...
Immediately. Oh fuck, need fire out northwest. Look at the blue door.
Fuck me, dude. Of course the desync just lets him like somehow magically pop in front of me. Cause like I fired when he wasn't in my scope. Like yeah, like I fired when you weren't in my scope, but then I just see you like pop into it after the shot went off, and then you died.
Sepsi, Dagon, get to the front door. Let's cross.
Arrow giving you saline.
So the treatment in the Arma, in this mod for Arma, with the combat medic, the treatment is way too sweaty try hard for me. It was way too complex. We don't need to do any of that. And that's why I like with the 30th century system where everybody's armor and suits has, an injection port, in each arm or something like that, where, okay, he's, injured, I do a quick, or downed or whatever. I'm just going to give hemazole. Done. Split second animation, they're back up. But, or, okay, I've scanned them, while they're, returning fire or whatever, and I can see that they have these injuries, so I know what symptoms they are, and so I know I need to treat with these drugs. I'm going to give them, a 5-minute dose of this and this, and then done. They're treated. None of this long, like what they just did with moving through all these windows and, applying, multiple different treatments and all that. That is way too sweaty, try hard sim. Not necessary. We just need to be able to quickly inject treatments, hypospray like into your armor, your suit, that would be ready to go with this. There are already systems in place that are being designed where a machine will place an IV in you, and so to me, it's totally reasonable that you put on your spacesuit and your armor, and then you put on your arms, and then it does a little thing that's underneath this part of the gauntlet or whatever, and injects a catheter into you, and that way you can just inject right into this little circle thing, and it'll go straight into your bloodstream. And the medical tool, does it in injects it in a pressurized manner, so that you're not sitting there going slowly infusing. It's just a hypospray. You're done. And it's a simple animation. Nobody's locked in for a long period of time. But, the gameplay needs to be immersive enough where, okay, you want to get treated, you need to hold still for a split second while I inject you. You can wait that long. Or otherwise you're not going to get treatment. But we don't need to be doing all this. But at the beginning of this clip was really good because it showed that, okay, there's someone wounded there. The medic takes fire. He drops down to cover, coordinates with his squad. The squad pulls the victim into cover, and then the medic makes a break for it while they're getting suppressive fire to get into the building and treat the patient now that you're in cover. He didn't back around the corner of the building and lean around with his medical laser and, res the patient, heal the patient from 15, 20 feet away. Do you see what I'm getting at? Do you see where the gameplay is far more engaging, far more rewarding by not having ranged healing and just allowing for a very short administration of medicine, in an animation? The best part about it is they are building an animation system in your ships, so that way, regardless of where the button is on a ship, regardless of how the ship is set up, whether it's an origin ship or a Drake ship, and the buttons are in two different places. If you press the keybind, it will move your arm to press that button wherever it's supposed to be. And it doesn't create a bespoke animation. It's just a diegetic system that's holistic in that, it knows that the button's here, and I know I have to move this way to push it, or move this way to push it, or over here to push it, regardless of what kind of ship I'm in. You can do this. You can take that same technology and apply it to somebody who is in a prone position, someone who's in a kneeling position, in a standing position, regardless of where that arm is, with your injection port on the inside of it, just like how we already have the animation to inject yourself, to treat your own self like that. Same thing, regardless of what position the patient is in, it will create an animation to, reach out, grab that arm, done. That's not even a second long. Not even a second. compared to this sweaty tryhard nonsense. And so by doing it that way, it offers a whole lot more to the gameplay without taking anything away from it. And then I just wanted to show this clip because I love Foxhole. I think it's a really fun top-down game. But the medicine isn't super complex, but the coordination amongst your squad and the emphasis on, using smoke and covering fire in order to go get the wounded and bring them back and then treat them in cover is really great. And that's why I like it. So we'll watch a quick clip.
Cover fire, please. Oh, shit. Oh no!
So it wasn't a happy ending, but it really highlighted a point that's really important where if you can do ranged healing, you aren't incentivized to use the body dragging system or the carry system that they're building in order to move a patient to cover to treat them in somewhere where it's safe. You're just going to stand behind whatever cover's nearby, as long as it's close enough, and then heal them. Versus, I need to get you back to someplace safe before I can treat you. You're going to be okay. You're not dead yet. They know that their down timer is an hour or something like that or whatever. And you do it in a way that makes sense. And you don't, that's why I hate healing beams, because it doesn't make sense. So this is here, we'll pull up this part. And so to that end, and I've been talking about it, this is why I really think that our, not only should all suits and armor, just like they made regeneration a almost not regen. They made imprinting a universal thing. Imprinting is everywhere. Regeneration is not. But I think that part of that should be all armor and all suits. Should have it should be an industry standard that says everything has an injection port. You put on your suit and your industrial armor to go to work, and it has an injection port in case you become injured or ill. Same thing for combat, armor and suits. It has an injection port, and it's standard practice. Everybody has it. But I also think that, and this is something that I agree with Paul a lot, and the CIG has talked about it directly, your character with your armor and your suits are going to be much more like spaceships in that, there are going to be ways they can be customized for function, and have consumption of resources, all that sort of stuff, in order to really make everything very diegetic, very immersive. And I think that there should be modules, medical modules, that you can install on, a module slot on your armor that does a auto inject of hemazole if it detects that you have gone into shock and you've been downed. I think that you might be able to have a module that you can put on your arms and your arm and leg armors, so that way if you sustain a tier 1 injury, or maybe even a tier 2, but at least a tier 1, where it it applies a tourniquet. It won't show you anything on the player, but if you get scanned, the medic will know, okay, that there's a tier 1 injury, the bleeding has already been stopped. I don't have to apply hemazole to that limb because the bleeding has been stopped. And that would prevent your by doing that, it would make it so that way your downed timer stops ticking. And you're downed, but you're not getting back up until somebody somebody treats you and revives you. But at least you're not going to die in a hurry. And so what I'm talking about is what allows for what we call in the military, and this is part of the tactical combat casualty care, and this is just the absolute basics of being a combat medic. If somebody is injured, you're in a combat scenario. If somebody is injured and they go down, you as the medic and your squad, everybody returns fire and you take cover. You do not rush. And this is something that most gamers absolutely screw up because they see, oh, there's somebody I can heal, and if I heal them, I get points. But they run up to the casualty and then they get shot and then they're dead. And they don't get anywhere. You never attempt to rescue a casualty until hostile fire has been suppressed. So you start putting covering fire in order to keep the enemy's heads down and to at least reduce the amount of return fire that you're receiving. And then your buddy who is out on point took a round to the leg and they're downed and they're out in the middle, but there's a couple of crates to the right of them, or a vehicle or something like that. You talk to them. If they're downed, that's the other thing with the auto injection of the hemazole. Okay, you're not downed. You're not just laying there. You have that auto injection of your hemazole. You still have a severe injury or something, and you can't walk or whatever. Or the auto injector allows you to be conscious and then crawl to cover, or move to cover, based off of how severe your injury is. And then if they have, their own first aid stuff, they can treat themselves. You don't have to go running up to them to treat them. You don't have to expose yourself. But, this is part of being a combat medic. And these are the types of things, the scenarios that are engaging and rewarding and challenging and require teamwork and coordination that having ranged healing removes. So you tell them to move to cover. If they, that's why I think that the auto ejector of hemazole would be a great module. They can apply self aid once they've been auto revived, and move to cover, as well as the suit thing could automatically tourniquet off a tier 1 injury, and prevent the stop the clock on or a tier 2 injury. It could stop the clock on that tier 2 injury to prevent you from progressing to a tier 1 injury over time. These are a lot of different things that could you could incorporate very easily, because they're mostly things that are in the under the hood part of the medical system versus things that you have to actually render and make animations for. It's simple UI, and that's button pushes that enact code underneath the hood of the game. So let's we'll talk about the healing aspect, because we've been talking a lot about treating symptoms, and we're getting near the end, and but you guys will see what I'm talking about. So we're going to pull up a quote that I love to show people who think that medical gameplay is right where it needs to be and it's simplistic, and that's a good thing. So for the MISC Endeavor Q&A, this is the Q&A part 3. And again, all these links and everything will be in the show notes if you're watching this on YouTube. So for part 3, Tony Zurovec answered the questions on the Q&A. And the question is, with the Hope class ship, do you see medical as being a complete profession? Let's make this big. The medical profession is one of the more important occupations within Star Citizen, and it's intended to be one of the larger and more flexible roles. On the FPS combat front, medics will be invaluable. They'll be able to perform field triage that can heal some injuries entirely. Probably not going to be a thing, but and mitigate others enough so that the injured party is at least more functional. That's what I've been talking about. With you being a medic, whether you're an industry medic or a combat medic, being able to, as we say in Army medicine, sustain the fighting force or maintain the fighting force. So that the injured party is at least more functional. You can continue to treat people that you don't have to hurry back to a med bay. You're just having to treat the symptoms, and keep them alive so that they can continue to work regardless of what that work is, until, at a later point when it's more convenient, you can rendezvous with the med bay. The effects of more serious injuries can often be slowed so that there is a better chance of reaching a hospital where more advanced medical apparatus can improve the chances of survival. This is that stabilization aspect that we're talking about. This Q&A was like in 2013 or 2014, and he's directly talking about concepts that were talked about in the lead up, as part of in the documentation for 3.15, however many years later that was, like 8 or something. So it didn't go away. The design, really hasn't changed. It's just been refined. Depending on the cause of death, a well-trained medic can occasionally restart a patient's heart, although death may soon reoccur if the root causes are not quickly addressed. So this is, you're giving the hemazole to, restore perfusion and get them back up, but you still have to stop the bleeding. You still need to stabilize those injuries, otherwise, that timer can click on down again. Northern Trooper says, with space medical play, we also have to worry about radiation poisoning and other effects we would have to treat on, or will that be limited? No, I totally think radiation poisoning will totally be a thing. Absolutely. It's been talked about in the lore where people have been exposed to radiation. We know that the pyro star is still going to be dangerous. You need to have appropriate shielding for your ship. That I don't think that's going away at all. I think it's going to be a risk, something that you're going to have to plan for. But I don't think it's going to be strictly environmental. I think that radiation can come, from a damaged reactor on your ship, and other things. The RSI Apollo. So this is from the Q&A from the RSI Apollo. Will there be any interactive gameplay? This is in 2018. So like 4 or 5 years after that previous Q&A question. Will there be any interactive doctor gameplay to healing in medbays and first aid, or will it be automatic based on the tier of healing? The design for doctor medical gameplay is not fully signed off, but it currently has interactive elements to it. One of the things that we always want to do with Star Citizen is to make player interactions physical, rather than just pressing a button and walking away. An example being the current mining loop that requires a level of constant control instead of automatic extraction. We're going to come back to mining because that's very important when we talk about healing and what I have, as far as suggestions for it. Yeah, Zalea, you're spot on in the chat. So, like in the RSI Apollo Q&A, mining is a really good example of what good UI can do to gamify something that in reality is very complex. In mining, you apply power to your laser in order, and other modifiers like from devices and stuff, to destabilize a rock within a certain window without, in order to break it successfully. But you have to get it into the green and keep it into the pardon me, and keep it in the green for a certain period of time in order to be successful. That's the goal. And medical gameplay should really be much the same way for healing. Not really so much for treating symptoms, but for healing. And so let's take a look at a couple screenshots because I'm gonna tie all this together. So here is a hospital room on Orison, and you can see here's the med bay over here in the bottom right. Here, let's make it big. Medical bed here on the bottom right, and next to it is an IV station where you can plug in medications and hang bags for infusions, just like we do in real life. And guess what? You can interact with these and pick them up right now. This is so real for me, and we're going to tie all this together here in just a second. It's going to make a lot of sense. Same thing. Oh, wait, was this one? Oh, this is New Babbage. Sorry, and this one was in Orison, I guess. But again, you have your IV station over here. Your scanning device thing over here. Potentially, I think that this is a tier 1 bed because it has this big old, potentially could be a tier 1 bed because it has this big old scanning circle thing for, probably you go in there for regeneration, as well as healing via regeneration, like growing new limbs and organs. Whereas this one's a tier 2 bed because it doesn't have that, I don't think. We'll just have to see. But a lot of implements that are able to be interacted with, and here's the scanning, and you see your health bar here. You've been scanned. You know that there's an injury here. The the level of the injury, what the recommended treatment is, or if you're doing stabilization because you can't heal, what the recommended drug is, in order to combat what symptoms. This is good UI. This is a good start. And they can add a few more things onto this to make it a bit more informative. But this is exactly what I do in real life. Just like with mining, I am applying with medicine. I'm applying different medications, and infusions in order to get something into the green and keep it in the green over a period of time. And oftentimes, and this is what I want for healing, where sometimes those things that you are giving in order to get to provide healing and get them into the green, they may be competing, and so you have to balance those things and do what we call titration. And this is my job. This is my reality. But obviously, this is really busy. There's way too much information on here. We don't need all this. We need simple, like this, but maybe with a bar, a progress bar of time to being healed for, an injury that's, you're currently, for each one that you're currently treating, and, you have a symptom meter or something like that, you have to keep in the green with the various, things that you're infusing, whether it's medication or, regen serum or whatever, in order to keep it in the green while they're being healed. Again, this is real life. You're titrating these things in order to keep these wavy lines and the numbers associated with them happy. But for medical gameplay, we can just make it so that way, there's a progress bar towards healing, and this is the rate of healing that's occurring based off of how much you're infusing. But you also have to titrate and balance those different things that you're giving in order to not, go just like with mining. In order to, while the progress bar, let's see. So while your progress bar of healing is going up towards completion, you are keeping them in the green in order to not give them untoward effects from too much medication. But you also need to keep them in the green and not, you want to make sure that they're not, that they're getting enough medication, to be in the green, to have those goals. And what they can do is by keeping someone in the patient will get healed over a period of time. How well you keep them in the green can accelerate how fast the healing occurs, but also, if you keep them in the green, it affects your payout from insurance. And so, the player already has insurance. They don't have to pay you out of pocket or anything like that. But, the rating they give you, the rating the system gives you will be dependent on how quickly you got them healed, as well as how much in the green they were. Were they over in the red? Were they below in the yellow? Did you keep them in the green? And that's what will, give you a payment modifier as well as a reputation modifier based off of the organizations that are medical in nature in game, because reputation is the other currency in game besides just monies. But I think that'd be a really great way to gamify healing, not just treatment of symptoms. Using good UI, you don't have to do anything with the character, have things show up on the character or anything like that. You just have good UI to represent it, and you do, gameplay that is very. If a player has mind, they're familiar with what they need to do. It becomes very, you can very quickly become familiar and acclimatized with it and how it works in a very short period. But it also allows for scale. So based off of how many injuries the player has, you can have multiple injuries, and illnesses and multiple symptoms and stuff. And so the more injured a player is, the more challenging, just like a more challenging rock, the more challenging it is to keep them in the green while you're doing the healing. The healing takes longer because they have more injuries and illness. And that healing, that optimum window is smaller, just like a more, challenging rock, but because they have more injuries and because they have more illnesses and stuff, and it's more challenging, the payout and the reward, in UEC and reputation is that much greater. So you want to be able to take on those missions. You want to have the reputation with those organizations that says, hey, there's someone with a tier 1 injury or one tier 1 and 2 tier 2 injuries. You have the reputation, you go treat them, because that makes it rewarding, and it also it encourages you to use the healing system versus just using the automated system. Because you could have you should have a mode where, if you've got a tier 2 bed on your Carrack and you're an explorer, okay, well, maybe you don't have your medic with you who knows the bed, but you still need to be able to heal people. And you just do the automated healing, and their convalescence period after healing is longer because you did the automated. Or if you're just trying to do more missions, trying to make it up in volume, you could do more healing on your tier 2 beds on your Apollo. Or maybe you have multiple patients and you can't babysit all of them, but you need to get them healed up. That could be, a viable thing, and by doing 4 patients, with less attention instead of, versus 1 with more attention, you make the same amount of money or make a little bit more money and a little bit more, reputation versus the more interactive system. But being able to get those missions via reputation and via actually performing the challenging skill on patients of increasing challenge and difficulty is the way you build that system and allow for skill progression and higher rewards in game. And we're almost done. This is the last little bit, and I just want to remind everyone, when everybody's like, oh, we don't need all this, I'm just going to backspace, I'll just regen. Regeneration is expensive, and CIG has told us this multiple times. In the first Lore Maker's Guide, they told us, today, while the regeneration process remains costly, even the lowliest space station is equipped with an imprint-capable medical scanner. So even the lowliest space station is equipped with a medical scanner for updating your imprint. It does not say that it is equipped with a medical bed that is capable of regeneration. This is why tier 2 beds aren't going to be regen capable, people. It was in the roadmap when they first showed that stuff up, where it wasn't going to be. They only changed it just because of the state of the game. I absolutely promise you're going to be disappointed if you think that tier 2 beds are going to be regen capable. Just like they can't do tier 1 injuries. It is heal tier 1 injuries. It has always been that way in the development of the game. And I've got all the citations regarding the Endeavor and the Apollo that show that, spawning, essentially respawn, is not going to be a part of tier 2 beds. And it's not necessary, because that's not how things work in real life. You don't need a regen bed everywhere. You just need them sprinkled around here and there, so that way people can, if they die, they can come back and go on about their day without too much inconvenience. But in the Lore Makers community questions from last month, a question was asked about the effects of regeneration on society. Again, all these links are going to be in the show notes. Let's see. Third, the broader cultural impact. It's understandable that we want to try and explain the risk-embracing behavior of players as an indication of the broader cultural impact of regeneration. But people don't drive more recklessly because they have seatbelts. A lot of the repercussions and limitations of regeneration aren't represented in the current iteration of the game. So while some individuals might be more reckless, it's likely they were predisposed for that behavior regardless of the wide availability of regeneration. For companies and organizations like the UEE, the giant, overarching, all-powerful, massive government of human civilization, regeneration is still a costly process. For organizations and companies like the UEE, so little old you, little old you, who is not an oligarch in Star Citizen, regeneration is not going to be cheap, and there's going to be consequences to it. We have already talked about how there is going to be convalescence periods and symptoms that you have to deal with that will, you probably require treatment to take care of, or it's just going to be based off of a timer. For companies and organizations like the UE, regeneration is still a costly process, and it's almost always either cheaper, easier, or simply more moral to focus on saving lives, treating symptoms, and good medical gameplay and healing, than it is to rely on this imperfect technology. Imperfect. So, that's one little reminder. The medical and healing and actor status system in its current and future iterations is designed to integrate with the idea that the entire design of Star Citizen is to encourage you to preserve your character, calculate risks, and plan and work together with others to achieve your goals. Planning is the ultimate gameplay of Star Citizen. Risk versus reward is the most engaging part of the game. Making those decisions based off of the information and resources you have available. That's what makes for engaging gameplay. As long as you're not running around in your medical gown, you won't die easily. Unless you are just exceedingly risky. Everything about the way the game's being designed is so that you don't die easily. Ships aren't meant to just blow up. Your armor and your suit are supposed to protect you from the environment. You're going to have to take repeated damage while wearing armor and a suit in order to even gain an injury, let alone die. So you won't die easily. You won't be severely injured easily. You won't be forced to go get healed immediately. That's the whole point of having the ability to treat symptoms. So you can have an injury, but mask the symptoms of that injury until it's more convenient or until for you to get healed. And that's part of the planning process. Okay, I've got enough medicine to treat these symptoms for 45 minutes or an hour of gameplay. So let's finish mining these rocks. Let's finish, salvaging this ship. And then we'll head back to the station. Or while we're finishing salvaging, we're in Stanton. Or we're in a system that isn't, 100 AU. Let's call for medical support. And by the time we get done, after I've treated you, we can rendezvous with a medical ship and they can treat you. So you're not going to get forced to go get healed immediately in order to continue to play the game. As long as you plan ahead, you bring a medic with you, you bring some medicine with you in order to treat symptoms. If you go out unprepared, you're going to have a bad time, and the symptoms are going to impact your gameplay. And hopefully you'll learn your lesson. And you're going to be encouraged to use these systems, use the systems and the way they're built to survive in the game. It's a good design. I like it. There's only a few little quips I have with the way it works right now, and I don't think that's a permanent thing. And I'm hoping that CIG, maybe they see this, maybe they, other people have had the same ideas, and that later when it's more of a priority, they can, implement some of these things, particularly getting rid of the stupid healing beam, in order to take this gameplay to that next level, to make it on par with the other aspects of the game, with how immersive and engaging it is. So that is it for this scanner anomaly. I know that this has been probably the longest podcast that we've done. We're almost at 4 hours between a spectrum pulse and a scanner anomaly. But there's been a lot of discussion on what we talked about in the... Actually, here, let's go back to this. Yeah, so there's been a lot of discussion in the community about what's going on with Star Citizen right now, and its growing pains with PES and 318, and a lot of that frustration has been misdirected towards Squadron 42 and the priorities of development. And I Nazeris and I thought it was important in order to highlight and put things into proper context, so people have more appropriate expectations of what's going on and how the development is going, and why it's these aren't bad things. It's going to be good. It takes more time. And this is with the medical and the healing. This is a conversation I've had multiple times in my Discord and Paul's Discord. And so I just wanted to put these things, in good frame of reference, so that way you guys understand, what we have right now, what sort of intent CIG has laid out with previous statements and other documentation. If you want to know more about all of the lore and the design documents, I'll put the link in the show notes of the previous podcast episode that we did on medical gameplay, and that just went over all the different design documents and the lore for each ship. This was prior to the C8R, and so you can see all those links in there. There's a lot of information. There's an awful lot. There's a whole bunch of links. So, but yeah, I wanted to frame all that in appropriate context so people could see where I'm coming from with my hate for healing beams, but why I do in general, by and large, love the medical gameplay and the system that CIG are building. So yeah, we are at the end of the podcast, and I just want to say thank you everyone for hanging out and being a part of the show. Again, if you ever have any questions, leave them in the comments below if you're watching this on YouTube, or join my Discord, be a part of the conversation. The link is on my YouTube on the About page. The link for my Discord is also in the About section here on Twitch. And we'd love to have you be a part of the conversation. I hope to hear more from you soon. Please consider giving, if you're watching this on YouTube, giving a like and a subscribe. Help the channel to grow. We are like right at 900 subscribers on YouTube. We need 1,000 to get monetized. And as soon as we get monetized, then that means more money for StackUp.org just from you watching the video. So that's where we're going. Keep an eye out for more updates on the next episode of the Armchair Admirals and Generals podcast, which probably not this next weekend. I'm hoping to do it on the following weekend, but I got to coordinate with the new guys. And I'm also going to be finishing up my
part of the crew, part of the
see, this time it worked.
crew, part of the ship, part of the crew, part of the ship, part of the crew, part of the.
Yeah, see, I had it in the right window. But I'm finishing up my boarding actions video. It's probably going to take me another week and some change, but I'm going to hold it and release it the beginning of the week of Invictus launch week. So like that, I think that Monday. So that way it will catch the algorithm with all the hype leading up into Invictus launch week, and hopefully do really well, push us over the edge with 1,000 followers, get me to monetization on YouTube for StackUp. Yeah. I can't wait for the sequel to this segment. We could call it Dr. Strange Tree, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Beam. I love beams for everything else, just not for healing, because it negatively impacts the gameplay. Compared to every other game with a combat medic in it, it negatively impacts the gameplay, and it doesn't add anything. It's a fix for a problem that could be addressed by just having a quick animation that fits with what we're already doing in the game. That's it. But yeah, I will talk to you guys later. I gotta hit the hay. Take it easy. 07. Good night.